Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Geoff Hackett. I'm the mental performance consultant at PacificSport, Vancouver Island. And today I'm excited to bring you a session on an important skill that athletes can use to impact their mental skills and impact their mental game when they're looking to prepare, looking to refocus, looking to recover, and looking to make use of their time effectively outside of when they can actually physically train in their sport. So when we're talking about imagery, what we're trying to create is a blueprint of how we want to go about our performance and how we want to recreate how we think and feel about how we play. So this session, normally when I do it in person, is a lot more interactive with a lot of different examples and different activities that athletes and coaches and parents can try. Uh, Obviously, we don't have that opportunity today, but what I do have are some pretty cool anecdotes of some pretty cool videos that provide some evidence about how high performance athletes use imagery to prepare. And so I want to weave those into the presentation today and discuss how you can take some of these skills and apply them for yourself and your sport. So when we're talking about imagery, we should back up a little bit and discuss this idea of what visualization is. And this is probably a more common term that is pretty well known, not only in sport, but just in kind of everyday life and popular psychology. And when we're talking about visualization, we're talking about recreating what we see, trying to picture in your mind about how you play your sport, what do you see for yourself, how do you see yourself having success. And it can be in a very detailed, very direct sort of perspective where you're focusing specifically on what you have to do. And then people can visualize a bigger picture. What are their goals are? What are their dreams are? Where do they want to see themselves in the future? And so it's a common skill that many people use throughout their life. And it's important for us to discuss what this looks like with regards to our sport. And we're going to talk about what visualization is, but also how we take it further with imagery, which I'll explain in a minute. So to go back maybe 40 years within golf, we talk about maybe the best player ever, Jack Nicklaus, who's one of the all-time greats of the game. And he's won the most majors. So those are the British Open, the Masters, the PGA Tour, all those different events that are kind of the four major tournaments within golf. And he's won, I don't know how many overall tournaments, but he's won the most majors. And this is a pretty cool quote from him that describes his process for what he does before he hits any golf shot. And you can read it there for yourself, but it breaks it down into three different kind of stages. He sees where he wants the ball to finish on the green or on the course, anywhere on the course. And then the scene quickly changes and he pictures and visualizes what's the trajectory of the ball that's going to take it there. And how is the ball going to get to its destination? And then he takes it back one step further and talks about what's the type of swing that's going to hit the ball in a certain way. And so it's a very detailed sort of perspective and kind of gives an insight into what if his process is when he's going through his pre-shot routine and starting to visualize how he wants to see himself hit the golf ball, where he wants it to end up. And also importantly, adds details about what's the trajectory of the ball and how does it get to its final spot. And so this is probably, in a time where athletes maybe weren't as open of maybe using imagery to prepare and perform, but it's kind of a very cool snapshot to show, where some of these ideas start from. And I want to kind of bring it forward now to talk about many different examples that athletes use to use this skill within the current sport climate. So when we're talking about imagery, how this builds off visualization is that it not only includes the sights that you see, what you can picture in your mind, but it incorporates other senses as well. It incorporates, what you feel, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, all your senses to recreate your sport experience. And the picture you see here is an NHL goaltender. He doesn't play for Columbus anymore. It's Sergei Bobrovsky. And this is a picture maybe going back 5 or 6 years ago before a playoff game. And so he would find a spot in their home arena in Columbus and put his headphones in, I'm sure, cover his eyes a little bit. Notice he has his glove in his hand, his piece of his equipment. And he would just go through what are the important things that he has to, perform well under pressure. So what are his movements? What is his positioning? What's the speed of the play like? And he's going through in his head examples of all these different things in order to prepare to play. And so throughout this presentation this afternoon, I've got a few examples of different sports, different contexts of how athletes use this skill to prepare to play. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll also have some really tangible, applicable things on how you can frame this for yourself and apply it to your own sport context. So why do we want to use imagery? And there's a few important reasons. And the biggest one is overall is that you're starting to use parts of your brain that you use to actually perform the skill in the moment in your sport. So it helps with your physical practice. If you can incorporate your imagery into what your technical training is like, you're going to strengthen those connections in your brain, strengthen that coordination, and really create awareness of what it's like to feel to play your sport. And that's a super important part of developing and trying to find these little edges that you can use to improve your game. And the second point there, maintain your skills when you're injured. And obviously throughout a time during COVID, it's an opportunity to still stay really connected with your sport. We don't obviously have a lot of chance to compete right now. Some sports are back into training, but using imagery is a great opportunity to start to enhance those skills and maintain them when you're not maybe playing as much as you'd like to in the current moment. And like I said, it creates that blueprint that we're looking for in our sport. So we're really starting to strengthen those connections in our brain, really starting to get the parts of coordination down, the important performance cues you have to be aware of, and starting to recreate what it's like to perform under pressure. And so when you do arrive at those moments within your competition, you're more prepared, you're more automatic, and you're able just to focus on what's going on in the situation rather than trying to overload your brain with information that can maybe distract you or maybe overwhelm you. And so it's a big part of our mental preparation in terms of how we take the time before we compete to work on these things, and how it can also be used as a way to refocus and recover as well. So I have a video here of Clayton Kershaw, who, if you don't know who this is, he's major league pitcher for the LA Dodgers. He's definitely a future Hall of Famer. He's one of the top pitchers in the world. And this is a video going back a couple of years in the World Series. And he had to pitch, I think, on short rest in this situation. So he was under pressure to pitch, and he had less recovery than he normally would. And so instead of throwing a bullpen session and tiring out his arm, there's an example here of how he was using some imagery in order to prepare and get his brain working and focused and ready to play. And so it's just a short clip. And I think it's on an ESPN baseball show. And so they're just kind of listen to what they're saying. They're talking about what he's doing in this moment.
In the bullpen at Fenway Park. This is via Ballpark Cam. What's he doing here, Dan?
Well, for me, he's going through his mechanics. It's dry work, but for me, it's mental imagery. He's cognitively functioning and trying to get his delivery down to what everything feels right off the mound. Because he knows his delivery leads to his command of all of his pitches. So how cool is this, though?
Yeah.
That he's out here all by himself, putting in the work that's going to prepare him in his mind to be the best he can be to come Tuesday night. After everything he's accomplished,
yeah,
this is the little extra work that champions do to be the very best.
Yeah, that's why this guy is one of the best pitchers of all time. I used to actually stand in my dorm room at UCLA. And
sure, in front of a mirror, right?
Well, no. I'd have the TV on. And so I'd be watching either the Dodgers and the Angels. And ironically, Chuck Finley was pitching a lot for the Angels. And my roommates used to talk trash all the time. What are you doing, Burns? Sit down, you geek. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Well, guess who I faced my very first at-bat in the big leagues? Chuck Finley.
And you probably were comfortable
because you were standing in front of the TV.
Yeah, you felt like you had faced him before.
And that's what I would do. I would pretend as if I was in the at-bat. And he just so happened to be the very first guy
that's cool.
that I faced.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's great stuff there from Clayton Kershaw, who has done a lot in his career. The one thing that he has not done, he's never pitched at Fenway Park.
All right, so it's a really cool example of how he's using imagery as a skill to prepare. And obviously, he's incorporating a lot more than what he can picture seeing in that situation. He's incorporating the movement. And I think that's a really key piece that separates visualization from imagery, is that you're starting to really get that connection with your body of what are the movements you have to do, what's the feeling that you have to pay attention to. obviously something very mechanical and technical, like delivering a pitch like he's doing, it's really important for him to go through those sort of mental checklist of what he needs to be thinking about and feeling in order to have the command of his pitches when he's, obviously going to be in a really pressure-filled environment, pitching away in the World Series. So kind of a little clip there and a little insight to how some top-level athletes use this skill to prepare in order to play. So where I want to take this next is to talk about what are the different attributes of imagery. What do we need to actually be thinking about? And if we're going to use this effectively within our sport, what are some things that we need to consider? And so there's a number of different examples that you see on your screen there, and I'm going to go through them for you right now. So the physical piece, and that's related to what equipment is required for you to use. Can you actually get a piece of equipment that you normally play with and incorporate it into your imagery? And so you notice in that last video, he had a ball in his hand. He didn't actually throw the ball. He transferred the ball into his glove when he delivered. And so there was actually like no velocity that he needed to really bring to the pitch to actually throw the ball to any catcher. So, but he had a ball in his hand, and you definitely know that he would be paying attention to the feel of the ball. Depending on the type of pitch, and baseball is very technical, you have to pay attention to what your hands are on the grip of the ball and everything like that. So think of the example earlier with the Sergei Bobrovsky. He had his glove on his hand, so he's paying attention to the weight of the glove. So start to think about how you can use pieces of your equipment and what's the feeling, whether it's that tactile feel, the weight of it, the texture of it. How is that going to help you get your mind thinking about what you have to do to perform well? The environment is also very important. So when you can practice, at the venue, if you have time before you get to your competition, if you can settle into a place, in the gym or on the field, wherever you're at, and start to go through seeing yourself play on the field. And when you immerse yourself in that environment, it can start to bring out some cues and things that you maybe wouldn't necessarily get running through your mind if you're doing it at home. If that's not possible, then try and create the situation as vividly as possible from your house or where you practice outside of the game. So start to picture where you'd play and pay attention to what those details are like. The task is pretty straightforward. It's what do you actually have to do to play well? And so what's important to understand here is we want to picture and create images that are positive, meaning that, we're not seeing ourselves fail, but let's be really detailed in what we have to do to perform well. So what's your technique have to be? What are, depending on the context of your sport, if you're a racing sport, you're probably focusing on your rhythm, you're focusing on parts of your race plan, your strategy. If it's a dynamic team sport, so something like baseball, something like basketball, you're focusing on what you have to do in possession of the ball, out of possession, in transition. What are those key details there? With an individual sport, there'll be their own differences of how do you have to refocus, recover, what's the level of intensity that you have to bring to your game. The emotional piece is, how does it look like for you to be fully focused, to be experiencing the emotions that you play? And that's a really important part of it as well, is that, when you immerse yourself into your sport, you're into a certain headspace. And so what are those emotions like? What's that level of intensity like? And how can you bring about those pieces to your imagery as well? The perspective, that has to do with whether you see yourself in the first person or the third person. And so there's not necessarily any ideal sort of situation for each athlete. You're going to be different, but think of it in terms of this. If you're wanting to have a more internal perspective, it's probably related to some content that is related to how you feel physically. So racing athletes, like a ski racer, for example, when they go through their imagery, they're paying attention to their balance, how they shift their weight, things that are a little bit more internal and relate to, their kinesthetic feeling. From an external perspective, maybe you're looking more at form. So for a golfer, if you're really paying attention to a certain technical detail of your swing, what would it look like from a third person perspective? Where would your hands be? What would your shoulder rotation look like? And as well from a team sport perspective, if you're talking about strategy or game plan, from an external perspective, what's the movement look like for yourself, for your teammates? How do you see the play develop from a bigger perspective? And then the timing is important. You want to make sure that the timing of your imagery is related to the actual speed that it happens in the game. So there's no point in going through something in super slow motion. You want to have it happen, in the time that it occurs. So the images don't have to necessarily be long and drawn out. They should be related to like what you actually have to do to play well. And so you could have a series of multiple things that you think of, but they would happen quickly or slowly depending on your sport. So when we're talking about further to get some ideas of what we need to do to think of, we're talking about what we're really talking about is how do we stay focused? What does focus look like in your sport? And so when you're trying to see yourself perform well, usually you're focused. So we link our focus to our senses, what we see, what we feel, and then also what's that internal dialogue? You know, what do we notice? What do we notice ourselves saying? And so think of what are some of these things that relate to the context of your sport. You know, what do you need to be looking at? What are some cues that you need to be paying attention of that really signal that you're focused? How do you relate, you know, what you're doing back to your touch? So for a basketball athlete, for example, for a free throw, what does the feel of the ball look like? How do they feel, you know, their weight into their feet, feel grounded when they shoot the ball? You know, those sort of examples start to link your focus to your senses. And so when you do that, you're going to start to get some examples and descriptions of what it's like to think and feel in your sport. And this is a really important part here. So not to try to, you know, overwhelm, you know, your imagery. If this is new to you, just start with this, you know, and then, you know, once you get the hang of it, once you go through the process of this a little bit, then you start to pay attention to some of those other attributes around maybe the timing or perspective. But right now, you know, thinking and feeling. So there's different sort of examples there with a shorter duration sport, and you can read those examples for yourself, you know, or more of a dynamic team sport where, you know, it's not as structured necessarily, and there's a lot of changing, a lot of constant things, you know, moving back and forth, you know, in your mind, and you've got to make sure that you stay present in the moment. And no matter what happened earlier in the game or what the consequence of is going on in the future, you've got to find a way to focus yourself in the dynamic, you know, element of the game, and just focus on what your role is in this moment in time, and just be accepting that that's going to move forward. And you've got to just stay with that in your sport. All right. So think for, you know, a moment for the sport that you play or the sports that you play, and what's it like to, you know, think of these things, and what, you know, as they relate to your sport, what do you have to be thinking of, and how do you have to be feeling to be fully focused? So here's another example that I wanted to share with you. This comes from a member of the U.S. biathlon team. This is a couple of years ago for the last Olympics in South Korea. And I think this gentleman's name is Bailey Lowell, and he's a biathlete. So biathlon's a sport, it's a cross-country skiing, and you come into certain intervals where you have a rifle on your back and you have to hit certain targets, and you accumulate points not only with your accuracy in your shooting, but also your overall time for your skiing. And so this provides a really cool example of what are some things that he thinks of, and how does he incorporate not only what he sees, but also what he feels. So he's going to discuss some things that we've already talked about and just apply it in a sense that is really relatable to his preparation in his sport.
45 minutes or so before the start, you're not thinking about how to ski fast or what it takes to execute the perfect biathlon shot or how much a biathlon race hurts. I tell myself it's just skiing and it's just shooting. I know how to do both of those things well. I ski through it in my mind, and I try to visualize what type of emotions I'm going to feel, what type of pressure I'm going to feel before it actually happens. I'm thinking about the race. I'm thinking about where I'm going to change my technique. If it's slow snow, if it's fast snow, if it's windy, if it's not windy. In my mind, I can see the changing of the digital numbers. And for a moment, I think, can I do this? Am I capable of putting myself through this again? Usually the crowd is screaming, it's pandemonium, but for me, that's the point where the audio and visual come in and become sort of a tunnel where the only thing that I'm focusing on is my own race. And in that moment, I have to repeat to myself, do what you can with what you have where you are. That's a Teddy Roosevelt quote, do what you can with what you have where you are. a song comes on that distracts you for a second. And it's all about getting back into your own zone. And for me, that reset button is just repeating that quote. I look at the snow, I look at where I am. I've got skis on my feet, I've got a rifle on my back. I know how to start the race, I just need to let my body do it. I know that at 10 seconds, I'll hear the audible beeps, and that's the trigger. I'm the bow with the arrow drawn, waiting, and when that beep changes, that's the release. And that's the acceleration, and I'm the arrow, and I'm accelerating down the track. Do what you can with what you have, where you are.
Okay, so some great examples there of the key, moments before the race, 45 minutes before the race, and how is that, or how is that time best used effectively in order to really get him in a place where he feels focused and prepared for what's about to happen, for the grueling race that he's about to put himself through. And so there's a few things there around how he's trying to recreate the emotions, trying to recreate the pressure, and he's starting to pick up some cues about what's important of, regardless of the distractions that could be there, how does he refocus and what does he need to see in his mind in order to be kind of in that present moment. And he has that mantra that he uses that allows him just to reconnect him with the moment before the race. And then he uses another little tool there where he creates a metaphor with a bow and arrow. And as he gets down to the final 10-second countdown before the race starts, he imagines the bow like flexing, or the arrow flexing in the bow. And then once he hears the final beep, then he's off. And so those are some different ways in which, in his world, in his context, imagery is a powerful tool to help himself prepare. And so when we're going to talk about how we can use imagery to prepare for ourselves in our sport, what we're really talking about is how do we manage our intensity level to get it to an optimal place. And so I just want to quickly touch on how imagery is used within the context of a really important part of your sport in terms of, how do you find that zone that he just talked about. And athletes will sometimes when they play experience that, where they get that sensation of flow, where they're totally engaged with their sport.
45.
And other times they will maybe not quite get there and they'll feel slow and sluggish and lethargic. And so that's when, your level of intensity is not where it needs to be in order to perform. And so the quality of your performance can drop. And so I'm sure you can all think of examples where you're in that psych up zone there. So that's when, you haven't quite got into gear yet. And you're kind of going through the motions. You can be really easily distracted. And so imagery is a really powerful tool that allows you to kind of boost yourself up. Not only what you do with your physical warm up, but how to get your mind engaged is to start to think about some of the things we've talked about. How do you think and feel? What do you need to be thinking and feeling in your sport? And how do you connect your focus to your senses? And then, as you kind of go through your performance, hopefully you get to this place where you're in the zone. But sometimes athletes can go too far with their intensity, and so they can use imagery as another way to calm themselves down. And so when we're talking about using imagery to prepare ourselves, I want to spend a little bit of time about how it's really useful in this psych up zone right here. So what we already kind of discussed, start to think of the venue. Where do you need to compete? Part of one of the biggest attributes of being kind of having a lower intensity than you really require is that you're very easily distracted. So you're thinking about things that are outside of the here and the now. And so when you start to visualize what it's like where you're going to actually compete, you're starting to move your mind in the direction of where you need to go. You need to start to focus in on where you're going to compete. What are the cues that you need to pay attention to? How are you going to get your mindset prepared in order to be fully focused with your performance? Depending on your sport, sometimes the opposition has different meaning. Within a racing sport, you usually have like many different opponents. And so trying to focus on each one can be a little bit overwhelming, but you just want to be aware of, people's strengths and weaknesses that you're competing against. If it's a team sport or if it's a one-on-one sport, then you need to be fully focused on, how are you going to maximize your strengths and minimize, their strengths. And so you've got to really be focused on, what are the key details? What's your game plan like? So it's important that you work through with your coach or in your parents or your teammates, what's the game plan for your upcoming competition, and how can you incorporate your most effective imagery to factor in your opposition and what you need to do to play well against them. The highlight reel is a great example. It's where you kind of think back to what are the strongest performances that you've had in recent memory, and what are the things that stand out with those. It could be goals that you scored, saves that you made, races that you were really fast in. It could be practices that you were really played well. Parts of your performance that you're really proud about. So starting to put together that little mental highlight reel of what you have done in the past, and use that as the way to kind of motivate yourself and get you up for competition. And then a very vital thing that not enough athletes, I think, pay attention to is, what does your best body language look like? And your body language is so influential in your overall performance and your mood and your mindset, not only for yourself, but for what your teammates and your opposition think of you as well when you're competing. So what does your best body language look like? And if you were to have, a really strong body language in your performance, what would it look, what would your shoulders be doing? Where would your head be? What would your eye contact be? Those sort of things that you need to kind of pay attention to. And so that's a really important piece, because mistakes will happen in your performance. And so you want to make sure that you recover as quickly as possible. And so using imagery to think of, okay, I made a mistake, or I didn't make the best play there. What's my body language look like? And so when you start to really use that as a way to refocus yourself, it can be a really powerful tool to re-engage with the game and continue despite some adversity that you may face. So I want to go through a few different styles of sports and talk about how imagery can be used in each of them. And I'm not sure for the people watching all your sport backgrounds, but for athletes that have a racing sport, there's usually a lot more structure into this type of sport. And so what I mean by that is, it's kind of this unofficial structure that you can use to your advantage. So how do you break down the race into certain phases? And what are the keywords that you start to associate with each of those parts of the race? So you can read the examples there for yourself. But what the idea of this is to not only think about, what are the words that you want to try and remind yourself of that kind of dictate the mood or the flow of the race, but what does the imagery look like that you layer over top of this? So when you, at the start of the race, when you're telling yourself to like explode or have power or to go, what's the sort of feeling or image that you can think of that really allows you to enhance that moment? And so an example being from the video that we just watched with the bow and arrow, the feeling of that kind of like built up energy that he's going to just shoot quickly off the start of the race is something that he can use to his advantage, that builds up, that part of what's the key piece of that part of the race being the start. And so you can find other examples there for the quarter of the race, the middle of the race, where you're looking to maintain your pace, and then that final push that is so important in a race as well. So I have another example here of a similar sport, cross-country skiing. And Sadie Bjornsson here is talking about how she uses imagery for different, for some of the things that we just discussed in terms of how it works into her strategy for developing a structure of her race plan.
I try to relax every single muscle so that there's really no tension involved. The only muscle working is my brain. I just shut my eyes and I visualize, the different ups and downs in the courses, where I'm gonna make my moves. I love when it's like a really cold morning with the perfect snow and it makes that perfect and they always have a timer that counts down. It makes me so nervous, even when I hear it in the summer, because that is the start of the race, and it's like, beep, 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 beep. I'm heading up to the first climb. I definitely don't want to go too hard at the beginning, because this is a hard course and pacing is important. Nerves come in a lot of different forms. Sometimes they come to your muscles and they make you feel like totally shaky. Sometimes they do this bizarre thing where they make you so nervous that you almost become to this relaxed state where you're like, okay, come on leg, you can do it. You're halfway up the climb. This is when your legs start burning. Don't think about that, just think about being light, being light, being light. There is no weight holding me down. I am just this bird flying up the hills and across the flats. I actually discovered that the positive voice in my head that's talking to me during races is actually my mom's voice. Come on, Sadie, come on. Light as a bird. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, left. Crest over the top of the hill. Low tuck. Don't be afraid of that corner. Rip out of the corner. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think my favorite times to compete are when the crowd are so loud that this roaring of voices becomes like almost this, it like doles out anything in your head. It's just this buzz that overtakes everything. You gotta stay in it. You still have one more climb, headed for the final climb. This is where you know you have to dig deeper than anybody else is willing to. Okay, you got it. All right, headed down for the finish line. Get your hands up, the line is right there. I have those times where I see us crossing the line and winning that medal and the faces of the girls on our team and just the excitement and it's totally that extra motivation that's like, okay, I can do this and I'm gonna do it. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I have visualized the emotional part of it. I really try to not look at my competitors. I think sometimes when you look at them, they seem like they're like 30 feet tall or their like muscles are, you know, this big and you don't see just another competitor. And so I try to not look around. I try to only think about what I can control and what I'm going to accomplish. It's nobody else, it's me just doing what I do every day.
All right, so this is another great example from the U.S. national team of how some of these racing athletes use imagery and visualization for the different components of their sport. And so there's some really good examples of when she was talking about different stages of her race and what are the different sort of images or even metaphors that she uses to push herself through obviously the physical pain and the fatigue that will inevitably happen in a sport as grueling as cross-country skiing. So there's a bit of an idea of how you can take your race, break it down into different sections, not only provide some keywords for what's important for you to focus on in that moment, but what are some images and what's some feelings that you want to try and recreate in those moments that push you through those difficult parts of the race. So where I want to move to next is talking about a routine that athletes can develop in their sport. And what I'm mostly focusing this part on are, depending on whether it's an individual sport, whether it's a racing sport, or whether it's a team sport, there are certain elements to, your competition where you are in kind of complete control of that moment. Even if it's only for a brief second, you have an opportunity to kind of dictate the tempo and the pace of the game that you're competing in. So an example being a volleyball player with their serve, a basketball player with their free throw routine, a baseball pitcher, with his delivery from the mound, a soccer player, delivering a free kick or a corner kick. They're very brief moments in these games, but parts of them are very important for you as an athlete to slow them down and to have them go at your pace so you can be fully focused on what you're supposed to do. And so a way to think about this is to break it down to three phases. The first is the kind of the preparation phase. So you use kind of a physical cue to gain, attention. So if I think of a baseball player at bat, they would maybe, after the pitch, they get into a kind of a routine where after the catcher throws the ball back to the mound, they can just use a simple cue of just like looking at the pitcher's hat, just to re-center themselves, get ready for the pitch. And then what they're looking for in terms of a visual cue could not necessarily be the ball, but it could be sort of the arm angle of the pitcher, all right, or what's a quick cue that is going to get them thinking about what they need to do. And then, just that allows them just to kind of execute their swing. And it's not so much whether they make contact with the ball or hit a home run or anything like that, but it's like, are they having quality at bats where they feel that they are, in control of their swing, they're seeing the ball well, and they're making good contact with their hit. And so, and another example could be a golfer. When they arrive at the green, you use a physical cue. So you pick your ball up off the marker, you feel the ball in your hand. All right, then you put the ball back down. You focus your eyes on the line of your putt, looking for the breaks in the green and weighing like the speed of the green. And then, when you stand over your putter, you feel calm, solid, and you just have a smooth sort of motion through the ball. And what you're trying to do in that moment is not necessarily, obviously you're trying to sink the putt, but you're trying to hit a spot that you're aiming for. And if you can just follow that consistently over time, you're going to feel really good in your routine and confident in your ability to sink a putt. So I bring about that golf example because I have another video here that is probably maybe one of the best golf shots under pressure that's ever been that's ever happened. And where we're going with this is to talk about the 2005 Masters, which is one of the major tournaments. And looking at Tiger Woods' career, this is probably one of the best shots that he's ever hit. And so just a little bit of context for what you're going to see here if you're not familiar with this clip. He had a one-stroke lead going into the final 3 holes at the Masters. And so he's on a par 3 and he's hit his tee shot and it hasn't quite got he hasn't hit the green. He's kind of just rolled off the green, kind of on the edge of the fringe and near the rough of the edge of the hole. And so he's got a really tough next shot because the pin placement is so difficult that he's looking to, at best, maybe par this hole and kind of keep the one guy that's right behind him kind of, still chasing his lead. And so he's put himself in kind of a little bit of a difficult situation here. And what happens is pretty remarkable, but I want you to pay attention to what's his process, looking back at the following slide with those 3 levels, of how you prepare, how you focus, and how you execute. How is he using maybe some imagery in this moment to really focus in on what's important for him to execute this shot? So have a look for yourself and try and pick out a few things that you can notice.
This is the ball of Tiger Woods. Lanny, what about this?
Vern, this is extremely difficult. This is one of the toughest pitches on the entire place here. He's got to put this well. You can see him looking up the slope. He's almost got to put it up to where you saw Trevor Immelman's ball come from to get it close.
Well, I am reminded of Davis Love here 4 or 5 years ago when he pitched in.
Yeah, he's a little bit further up, I think, than Davis was.
Yes, he is.
Got the same basic kind of shot. He's going to have to get it close. He's going to have to put it up into the slope, though, somewhat. And, of course, it's made a lot tougher by having that second cut right behind the ball. It almost forces him, I think, to put it back and have to hit a low shot. He cannot put it up in the air with the second cut that close behind the ball. You can see him putting it back in his stance right here and picking the club up like he's going to hit right down on it.
And he's picked out a landing spot that is a good 25 feet above the hole.
There's a good chance he doesn't get this inside the Marco's ball.
In your life, have you seen anything like that?
All right, so pretty incredible shot. But what I really love about it is some of the applications, the things that we're talking about, and how you use imagery. And obviously golf is a very, very difficult sport, and it's something that imagery is almost kind of ingrained if you're going to try and play well. Is that before every shot, you have to picture it going well. Going back to the quote at the earlier part of the presentation around Jack Nicklaus, where he sees the ball land, how does it get there? What's the swing that it takes to get the ball there? Tiger Woods did something similar to that sort of process in this clip here. And a little bit of a backstory about that shot, actually. What he was actually aiming for was there was a dimple on the green from a previous shot that someone had hit. And the ball had hit there from an earlier round. And he noticed this little spot on the green. And he said to his caddy, this is about where I need to put it. Do you like this line? And the caddy said, yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's go for that. And the dimple was about the size of a dime. And so Tiger Woods, in that moment under pressure, hit his chip to that spot. And that's where he felt that the ball, if he hit the ball there, it would roll back down towards the cup and get close. I mean, the fact that it went in was a bonus, but it was such a brilliant shot. and it kind of really kind of excel him for the rest of this round, and he went on to win this tournament, which was the last Masters that he won until he won last year as well. So it's a really cool moment. You can see where he's looking at his spot, trying to picture out the lines and just trying to visualize where the ball is going to go. It's a great example of how an athlete can use imagery, in a moment where they have kind of control of the tempo of the game for themselves. So if that's something that applies to your sport, think about how you can use that as a tool as part of your routine, to be fully focused and on task under pressure. And
This is
where we're going now with this as well is to talk about maybe a little bit more of a dynamic sport. All right, so something like hockey, basketball, soccer. There's the goal of the game is to score goals and keep them in your opponent's net and keep them out of yours. So there's something to do with what you do in possession of the ball or the puck, and what you do out of possession, the moments of transition. There's all these different situations in the game that you need to be kind of just flowing with and paying attention to, and the ability to let mistakes go and stay current and present in the game. And so there's different situations where there's different examples here. What's your goal for the first 15 minutes of a game? What do you want to see yourself doing before or after you score a goal, after you concede a goal? And so there's little goals that you can kind of create for yourself there. And there's also some, like earlier, there's some cue words that you can use to kind of keep your focus up. But the idea here with this and what we're going to talk about is like, what's the imagery look like on top of this? And so what are the things you have to be thinking of? What are the things you have to, how are you going to recreate these situations in your mind? And so I've got a final example here that is a really cool video of a retired now NHL player, Mike Camilleri. This is video clips probably from about over 10 years ago. And this is on a segment of Coach's Corner, an older clip. And it shows him preparing what he's doing before the game. And so this was for you to just check it out right now, but how Mike Camilleri prepared for a game when he was playing for the Montreal Canadiens.
Kids, he's visualizing. Watch this now. Now look at this. I've never seen anything like this. And watch at the very end, this is a long one, he's looking right at the spot where he shot the puck. See that? He's I hear guys out there doing their sticks and everything. Isn't that something? Whatever he's doing right. Now look at you looking at that spot again. He got that spot down perfect. See that? He's getting ready to just snap that puck like that. Bobby did this? Bobby would be in the dressing room. He would not go out. Bobby would be in the afternoon at 2:30 in the afternoon, getting ready for a 7 o'clock game, just like he's getting ready, not quite as early. But Bobby would do the exact same thing. Now watch, it's that spot that he was looking. Watch that spot. Boom. And he had another great spot with it before. And see that spot? That's his spot visualizing.
All right, so another really good example that maybe applies to a different context. But if you think back to earlier what we talked about, what are the key attributes of imagery? So he's covering a lot of those bases there. So he's got hockey stick in his hand. So he's got the physical piece covered. He's in the environment. He's sitting on the bench and he's actually in the environment, just 5 feet from the ice of where he's going to be playing. And he's going through the timing of things fairly quickly. You notice his vision goes from, quickly from left to right. So he's replaying this moment in the game where he picks the puck up in the neutral zone. His team transitions it up the ice quickly. He gets into his spot, kind of just on the edge of the circle, and then it's a quick release for his shot. And so he's going through that over and over and over again, paying attention to, the focus and the level of intensity that's required, to execute that. So it's a really cool sort of example there for that athletes can use if that applies to the sport that you play. So whether it's a team sport, like hockey or basketball or soccer, where you're looking to score goals on one end and keep them out at the other. So, to talk about, what are some further ways that we can apply this for your sport, I've just got some examples here that, different contexts of how you can use imagery. And so the practice of a skill is obviously the first one. There's an example there for you to see. Two important things. You want to pay attention to what you see and you want to pay attention to what you feel And the connection between those two is going to allow you to create some really effective imagery for your sport. So in a soccer example, what you want to see, depending, this is going to vary on your position that you play on the field, but you want to feel really confident with the ball at your feet. You want to feel really, you're difficult to defend, you're unpredictable with your movement, you protect the ball well. You want to feel the ball, like just have total control of it, and you want to feel your body running and moving. If you want to control nerves, it's just seeing yourself with effort and intensity, right? Just be aware of, the distractions that can occur within a game, and then just really refocus on what it's like to immerse yourself back into the game. So see yourself working hard to get back in transition and defend. Feel your body relax. If you see yourself, under pressure in a moment, and there's a moment where you can breathe and just kind of take a step back, what does that look like? And think of these contexts of how you can, work this into your own sport. Another example could be with your preparation. So this goes back to the racing sport example. Depending on the part of the race, you want to see like an explosive start. A quick reaction to the gun. If you're a sprinter, like a 100-meter sprinter, obviously the duration of this race is over, roughly 10 seconds, depending on your level, but, maybe, max 12 seconds. So what you want to see and what you want to feel are important pieces to consider, right? You want to feel strong and powerful, feel full of energy. You want to feel really like intense with that race. And so this is something that, if this was applying to you, try and see the entire duration of that race in your mind. It's definitely, probably within 15 seconds. So it's something that you can pay attention to as you start the race. You get to 20 meters, you get to 50 meters, you get to 80 meters, you get to 100 meters. What are the things going through your mind, and in terms of how you think and feel about that race? And then a really important part here is how you review your performance. All right. So an example being with golf again, at the end of the round, think back to, you can look at your scorecard to jog your memory. Picture the 3 best shots of your day, and picture the 3 worst shots of your day. All right. And so with the positive ones, with the good swings, try and recreate what it's like to feel the smooth tempo of your swing. Feeling really confident over top the ball, feeling like less tension in your body. Usually that's, something that occurs when you swing the golf ball well. You're not gripping anything too hard, and, you're allowing your body to rotate and move. With your worst shots of the day, pay attention to what went wrong, right? It could be that you rushed it. It could be that you were distracted over top the golf ball. It could be that you had a lot of tension in your hands. Try and recreate and picture what that's like, so to monitor that the next time you go out and play. So what I want to do is I want to finish with an example of an exercise that athletes can take for themselves in their sport. And so it's kind of building your own script, right? And what I mean by this is like, what's your own content? And it could be a highlight reel, it could be a routine, it could be something to do to see yourself, calm down in a certain situation. And whatever it is, trying to think of an example that applies to your sport, but break it down into 3 areas. What's the prep phase of this look like? So how did this situation develop? What's the actual skill that you're going to perform under pressure? And then what's the outcome of this? Because there's always an outcome in your sport. So there's always the next play, there's always the next moment to refocus. And so you want to have an idea of how these things work together. And so, an example, just going back to that clip of Mike Camilleri, the hockey player, a few minutes ago, he's going through a little bit of a structure like this. And it's very quick, maybe it's 5 seconds total, but there's a few details that he's paying attention to along the way. So what does a prep phase look like? It's where the situation develops. So think of a certain scenario in the game or the race, and what do you need to focus on in that moment? So it could be your positioning on the field. It could be, receiving a pass, whatever the situation is. What's the action phase? So what's the skill that you're trying to do? What's the what do we want to get out of the situation? It could be, scoring a goal. It could be putting in an effective cross in a soccer game. What are the technical things that you need to have in mind? And what are the key cues that you need to be aware of? So, the timing of your teammates' movement, the stage of the race, there's many different examples, and I want you to try and think of a few on your own. And then what's the outcome phase here? So what's the reaction to what just happened? So, whether it's you make a little mental note of, that really worked, let's make sure to do that again. Or, how do you transition to the next play? Like, so after you're just on offense, it's about getting back to defense quickly, or transitioning to the next stage of the race, or refocusing after, a point in like a tennis match, for example. So here's a couple examples that I'm going to give. We'll go with the golf example again. So you can read this for yourself, but the prep phase. So, and this is what you can do before your round in this example. And so, just like starting to establish a bit of a routine. So you see, where your ball's lying in the fairway. And then you go through that example of, okay, well, with your next shot, where do you want the ball to land? And then what's the flight of the ball going to look like? So, if you're, a golfer, you're going to have obviously an idea of, what irons or clubs that you have in your hand, and what's the trajectory of the ball that's needed to take the ball to the, your target. And then, with the actual swing, what are the key points that you want to be aware of? You feel smooth. Picture, from an external perspective, right? What does a good golf swing of yours look like? What are the details with your stance, your tempo, contact? And then how do you visualize the ball taking flight from the club? And then the outcome phase, you see it land where you want it to, you reinforce the key points that made your swing a good one. And then the transition to your next shot. What's next? And the great thing about golf is that there's always something that's next. So even if something doesn't go as well as you wanted it to, it's about quickly refocusing and going through that process again. With a race, there's examples here in terms of, how you want to see yourself prepared and ready, the anticipation in your body with a 400-meter race. Obviously, one lap around a track, so there's obviously a certain endurance and strategy to this, but it's a fairly high-intensity race, and you want to see that plan, in your mind. When the race starts, you feel your body full of energy. You're paying attention to who's around you, and you look to, make your moves throughout the race, and pay attention to, people's, gaps that they open up, lanes that open up for you, and feel yourself, explode past people as you progress through the race. In those different stages there, what's it like at 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters, 350 meters, that final stretch. And then the outcomes, like, you feel the desire to finish with all your energy. You're trying to reel in the people in front of you as you're chasing down them in the final stages of the race. And then pay attention to what it's like to feel the emotions about racing a race that you're really proud of. And then another example of what athletes can use, this activity for themselves with a soccer player. With a game like soccer, it's many different moments in the game. And so, seeing yourself defend well, seeing yourself attack well in a team formation, 1v1, there's many, many, many different examples. So here is one for you to read. But in the preparation phase, you see yourself full of confidence, the ball at your feet, you're in a 1v1 situation to dribble past a player and get a shot or cross in, to your teammate. What actually happens here? So you see yourself drop your shoulder, change direction, good first touch out of your feet, bit of skill, creativity, whatever it is required in that situation. And then, the outcome phase, what's the final product of this, whether it's a goal, whether it's an assist, whether it's just, you're feeling really dangerous, and anytime you get the ball, you feel that, the defender can't handle you. These sort of ideas where you can just kind of break down these situations into these three sort of phases for you to focus on, and start to build a little bit of structure into how you can use imagery for your sport. So just to wrap up here, a few little tips to consider. You want to see yourself with a positive outcome, and it needs to be really process-based. So what you have to do to perform well. Incorporate your equipment. I think that's a big thing. So whether it's a golf club, whether it's a baseball, whether it's a baseball mitt, whether it's a hockey stick, whether it's your jersey, whatever it is, incorporate the feeling of the actual sensation of your equipment. What's your body language look like? What does your best body language look like with your shoulders? What are you looking at? What do you want to see? Or what do you want other people to see in you with your body language? And then, paying attention to things that are important for you to consider, like the environment, certain sort of feelings and mindset that's created when you walk into your home gym or home field, and start to really layer those things in as well when you're starting to create your imagery script. So I'm going to open up here with a few minutes. If there's any questions anyone had, you can put them in the chat box. You can turn on your microphone and ask them over the video here. And yeah, I'll just open up the floor to any questions that anyone has. Okay, so if there are no questions, what we can, I just want to finish up with and let you know if you're interested in learning more about mental skills and how you can use them in your sport. It's in the kind of the final stages. I'm just finishing up developing it and going to hopefully launch it right after the August long weekend. But Pacific Sports going to roll out a mental training course, and it's an online course that is self-paced. So you sign up for it, and there's different modules that you can complete, at your own convenience. There's information that's important for, the different topics that are offered, as well as lots of activities for you to take away and practice. And then you upload it all onto the Google Classroom platform that we're using. And then you get feedback from myself. And it's just a way to kind of learn more about mental training, and do it on your own time. Do it, at your own pace. And it's something that offers that flexibility that maybe athletes, in the past have struggled to figure out how they're going to work this into their sport. And so I'm really excited to have Pacific Sport offer this. And I will be following up with details on it once it's live and ready to go. And if there's any questions that you have about this, I'd be happy to answer them as well. So just going to check in with the chat box here. Tyler, how much time would you recommend an athlete in total as a pre-match? I think this will vary depending on your sport, but I think that an athlete should spend, find moments to transition. So if you get to the field, for a soccer player, for example, you get to the field like an hour before, maybe you get there a few minutes early just to start to go through some ideas in your head of how you want to play. And it doesn't have to be a grueling session. It could be 5-10 minutes, not even that. Think about the night before. Try and find little moments to use it as part of your preparation. So if your game is at 2 o'clock, right, you start your warm up at 1:15, let's start the process of getting ready for the game, whether it's just packing your bag and going through the final check at like 12:30, right? And so, once your game ends around 4 o'clock, you do a little cool down and a debrief. Picture your game time, in that day, time on the field is 2 hours, total time for before and after is 4 hours. And so, that's going to vary for every athlete, but just start to get in the mindset of, how you can use time before and after to really maximize, your progress in your process of how you play. So I would start very simply with imagery, because if you don't practice it often, it can be very difficult to do, for an extended period of time. Give yourself manageable goals to start. Couple minutes, at a time, and then extend that to 5 minutes and extend it to 10 minutes and beyond. If you're starting to go through your highlight reel and the different sort of skills that you do. But the work that you do outside of your sport, it really can have a major impact of, how you do in it. So hopefully that answers some of your question, but I would start with what you're comfortable with and then adjust it from there. All right, everyone. Thanks for attending this session, and I will be following up with the slides for people that attended this, and these sessions will be recorded and posted live on our YouTube channel. So if you want to rewatch anything that we discussed today or last week, that'll be available to you hopefully for the next week. So enjoy the rest of your day. I appreciate you taking the time to join me, and yeah, enjoy the sunshine. Take care.